Good evening, it's 7 o'clock, so let's begin. Could we start with any apologies, please?
Yep, so we have apologies from Councillor Kerr and Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. So on to item 1, minutes of previous meetings. We've got 2 sets of minutes.
I believe Councillor Albanese had an amend to suggest to the minutes of the last meeting.
Thank you. Yes, it was just that I know technically I wasn't there for the meeting that was adjourned, but I'd give. So if it could be noted that I'd given my apologies for lateness. I think Councillor Burke was at the same function I was at, and both intended to come, even though I wasn't there, and it won't affect the stats. I can't remember the other point I emailed you about.
Just an amendment from Her Royal Highness to Her Majesty.
That's it. Yeah, just a technical point on the second set of minutes. On item 11, Her Royal Highness on page 9, rather than it should be Her Majesty, where it's copied through in the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
So we can note that for the next minute.
Any other queries? I don't see any others, so thank you. Thank you. On to item 2, members' interest. Does anyone have any interest to declare? No. So on to item 3, notice of key executive decisions.
So I think the main thing I was just going to point out on the notice of key decisions, there's been one amend since the publication of this, and that is the tenancy strategy, which is due to go to the other ONS panel, is now been moved to February instead of January. But aside from that, the notice stands as it is. Is there any questions on any of the items?
No. So on to item 4, one leisure pricing proposal for 2023-2024. Thank you.
So if we could invite the officer and the executive councillor to come to the table to present to the panel.
Chair, before we go any further, I've got a couple of colleagues messaging me via WhatsApp saying there's nothing coming through on the live stream.
There's nothing coming through on the live stream.
Can you see if they can confirm if something's coming through now, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'd be pleased to. It's, Councillor Niche and Councillor Corley have both said. Right, it looks as though they might have got something now.
Yep. Okay. I'd like to bring this report to you. It is to do with the one leisure price increase. This will be 2023 to 24 price increase proposal. This is to mitigate and offset the increases seen through utilities, staffing and general operational expenditure. You'll notice within the report, we've looked at the last 5 years and excuse me, One Leisure has operated at a total cost to the council of 1.42 million. The forecast to the cost over the next 4 years, so that's 2023 to 27, is 1.28 million. You'll see that there's a recommendation within the report. The proposed option in the paper, if it's agreed, of an 8% increase. If that's adopted over the next 3 years, thereafter from 2024 to 27, potential revenue of 874,000. This will reduce any operating deficit over that period to 414,000. There is a priority to reduce the deficit on the council, achieve a break-even position and hopefully in the future to even make a surplus. We need to do this to remain competitive and keep the business sustainable. Happy for any members to ask any questions.
Thank you. Anyone? Oh, Councillor Welton.
Thanks. This is my very first council question. I've written it down to help me. So I understand the need for the increase, and I broadly agree with option 2 within that document. But I think it's important that One Leisure is sustainable and within financial reach of those that need and want it to use the facilities. I think we can all agree that physical and mental well-being often go hand in hand, and over the last couple of years going forward, perhaps we need to bear that in mind. So I'd like to get some sort of reassurance that the attendance, the customer retention and the new membership will be monitored across all One Leisure sites and reported back to either this committee at quarterly intervals. And finally, I can't see within the document whether there's any facility for individual centre managers to negotiate with local groups to gain regular and/or long-term use of the pool, pitches or courts. I wonder if you could confirm that could be the case.
Thank you. I can confirm the first part. We'd be happy to come and present on a quarterly basis if that's okay with the relevant parties in terms of a performance update. And then secondly, we've just recently appointed 3 new general managers, and I would be happy to make introductions to any clubs or any councillors in terms of an open evening or an open meeting so that they can actually welcome any clubs into the centres and liaise. We have an extensive reach through our Active Lifestyles programme, and obviously with clubs that are currently in place within the leisure centres, and we can open our arms and open the reach to those said clubs.
If I can just come in quickly on that, all of the financial information to do with One Leisure does go to the other panel on a regular basis, and I don't want to risk duplicating that, the workload, if that's okay. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of points I really want to touch on, really. I think it's important to note that the previous administration over 4 years made no increases to the leisure facilities at this particular council because it wanted to make leisure affordable and achievable for people within the district, especially people who are finding it financially difficult. I do fear that putting price increases up like this will potentially do the opposite for the household incomes when they're particularly choosing between heating and food and assuming that they're going to go down the leisure centre and take up weightlifting or whatever service we provide. I also fear a number of things really in relation to footfall, just because we naturally assume that we put prices up. Having run my own businesses, that has a detrimental effect in what you sell and what customers come into the business. And I'd like to ask the portfolio holder, what have you done in relation to increasing footfall and customer retention in relation to this paper? I also note on the appendices where we're looking at the proposed price increases, current prices for individual services. There's no real comparison in relation to what the current income is. So if we look, for example, you've got potential income changes, but what is the actual income at the moment? Because I can't compare that. It's just literally potential income. And when I've run my own businesses, potential and reality are 2 different things, really. So perhaps you could give us a bit more clarity on that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I can just touch upon the opportunities for accessibility. Within the report, you'll note under section 9, there's a list of pricing opportunities. What we've tried to do throughout the process is include, through our competitive analysis and benchmarking of other operators within the local area, we've removed the pricing tariff, for example, for under 3 swimming to allow parents and single parents to come into the facilities and access swimming provision. We've also retained the same price that's been the same price for the last 5 years for 3 to 15-year-old children, so that there isn't a barrier put in front of them, so they can still access the facilities. We've removed the concessionary price for fun zone, for example, across the facilities, and we've already started to offer a concessionary scheme where people can access that facility. And we've also, whilst the student membership price has gone up, we've removed the timing band restrictions to allow them greater access 7 days a week at any time rather than being in the centre by 4:30. That's one example. In terms of the actual revenue projections within the pricing report, on average, the preferred option has gone up by 8.7%. We've based that upon the revenue taken under those pricing tariffs in the previous years, and we've utilised that as a benchmark in terms of the price point and the revenue taken, and we've proposed the new benchmark pricing tariff, and that's where the proposed revenue benefits come from for the overall pricing increase.
Councillor Lowe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if One Leisure has looked at other groups, organisations to make use of the facilities, the pool especially. For example, physios offering water-based treatments for pre-op and post-op, sub-aqua clubs, and I'm not seeing anything on the website that sort of says about sub-aqua clubs and things like that. That's just coming up with ideas for other revenues.
So I think there's one key point is we've got the Active Lifestyles programme, who have an extensive programme both within the centre and externally. That's one thing I can pick up with them to have a look at external clubs that we can bring into the leisure centres. Essentially, that's one of their main attributes as a department. We've also got, like I said earlier, 3 new general managers that are finding their feet, and one of their key aims is to increase footfall within the leisure centres. So again, that's a key priority of ours. And essentially what we will do, we've got a good provision of clubs within the leisure centres, and we can extend timing across the programme to them. And again, we just need to make sure that's a balanced programme so everyone has an opportunity to access facilities.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a number of questions. Shall I go through them one at a time? I don't want to hog it, but there's a number of things across different parts of the report.
Whichever way you think works better.
Okie dokie. So the first bit, could I ask, please, I would like to ask, please, how much of this report is officer written and how much of it is member written? Because I'm concerned about the accuracy and about the executive summary, something Councillor Bywater made about the increase across leisure provision, and it uses the term driven through by the previous administration, which I think is a little bit politically volatile and not entirely accurate, particularly as there have, as I understand it, been increases over the last 5 years, but the determination really was to pursue a policy which made leisure facilities accessible, particularly across all income streams, and particularly not price the lower incomes and those on benefits out of the leisure market that we're providing.
Talking about outpricing people, we do have concessions, and we've just recently moved the concession information from the HDC website onto our One Leisure website, because it wasn't actually it wasn't easily accessed, and anyone looking for any concession, we've got concessions for Ukrainians, all sorts of concessions on there, but it was hidden away on our HDC website previously. So we've taken that and we've put it on our One Leisure website, so it's very, very easy to see, and then it will take you back to the HDC website to fill in the forms. So in that respect, we still are making sure that people can attend that, for whatever reason, are on low incomes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking of marketing and promoting things, one of my concerns all over the years, and it goes back to my now 21-year-old when he was under 18, the Courts for Kids scheme, which I think is excellent, but we never seem, as a council, as One Leisure, to push it, and we still don't. And my concern is that if it's not pushed properly, the 16 to 18 age group, at first I thought it was males in that age group that where the highest dropout of physical activity is, but the latest report, so I understand it, is it's girls and young women on that age group as they leave formal education and drop out of formal leisure provision. That's where the dropout is. And I would make a plea again that if we're marketing that is the way not only to fulfil our brief to give a leisure provision across the board, but to get a leisure provision for those people where the dropout rate is high, but also to encourage loyalty to the District Council's leisure centres from a commercial perspective. And I'm really seeking reassurance that we're going to market not only the concessions properly, but also the provision to the most vulnerable and where the dropout rate is.
If I could just come in on that point, as you will have noted within the report, we're currently undertaking our new business strategy, which will be implemented from early new year. As part of that, one of the key elements will be around the marketing and promotion of our facilities, particularly at different targeted groups. We're currently working on that new marketing communications and promotional plan in line with our sales and our retention and the different targeted groups. So once we have a draft of that, we're happy to share that with you and communicate that with you, but that will be targeted at groups and promoted and supported by our active lifestyles team as well.
I'll go for a couple more, if I may, Mr. Chairman, then let someone else have a go, and then perhaps come back later. Speaking of that age group, there's there's a bit in the budget about pricing for football pitches, for adult football pitches, but unless I've missed it and I've scanned through, there's nothing about Colts football pitches. Is that now all on AstroTurf? I remember when, again, going back to when I was running a Colts football team, you could go up to the outdoor Ivo or One Leisure Outdoor St Ives, and there were loads of pitches being used on grass. And there doesn't seem to be anything about income stream and usage in relation to that in this report.
Okay, I'll have to double check that, but from what I understand, the information within it, the predominantly the main matches are played on 3G, and there are grass pitch provision at St Ivo's, and they are still well utilised. So I'm not sure why that wouldn't be in the report or the spreadsheet, but that should be picked up as part of the report.
I think that's a worrying sign that a potential income stream, a potential usage indicator is missing from this report. I've got a number of concerns about it that if we're missing that, and if mini soccer is in particular, that's where my experience is, so that's what I'm able to quote, is missing, and that income stream is missing, and that usage is missing. That makes me doubt the validity of the report if there's holes in that, and there could be holes in the budget. So
sorry, just to confirm, the 3G football pitch revenue and the projections and the grass pitch revenue projections are within the spreadsheet that was provided as the appendices. I think the point you made was around Colt football. That may just be that it's included under the actual 3G pitch or the grass pitch revenue, and not a separate line within it. So to confirm the validity of the report, I'm comfortable with, because I helped support the writing of it and scrutinise the actual spreadsheet. So, like I say, the revenue should be included either under 3G pitch, because they can play on grass, or 3G, or grass pitch revenue, because that's still a provision at St Ivo's.
Any other questions? Councillor Burke?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, obviously I can see that there's some mentions of the Burgess Hall in there. And we've had previous discussions around the use and how frequently that's now being used. I just wondered what the plan is for that, because having been there quite recently, it doesn't seem to be utilised as much as potentially it could. And we're missing a lot of income from that. So that would be my concern, really.
If I could ask that we could keep to the point of the report, which is to look at the One Leisure pricing for 23-24, and actually we're going to be seeing a report from One Leisure in the coming months on progress and plans for all of the sites, including Burgess Hall, in the coming months.
Thank you. Just we're in the process, obviously, as you know, undertaking the 23-24 budget, and we're also looking at the different themes within that. One of them is commercial sustainability and business performance, and we've recently held two staff workshops in and around Burgess Hall. So that'll be a key theme and a key business plan of ours moving into next year. So we're happy to, like I say, update you within the next report that we share with you.
Yeah, I think it was just because obviously it's part of a One Leisure site. We're talking about budget. If we're not generating money, but we're talking about increasing prices, it just, to me, it should be part of it, but I've been told on.
Any other questions? Councillor Shaw?
Just looking at section 2.2 under the utilities section, it says that there's going to be an increase of predicted increase of 88% on utility costs. When was that? Is that still a realistic estimate? Because looking at other leisure centres and leisure facilities, they're sort of forecasting 150, 180% increases in costs of heating swimming pools, etc.
No, it's a very good question, and this was based upon the information that we've been provided by our facility management team and our finance team. It's through a new contract that's been appointed and confirmed. I do know I was at a conference today with many other leisure operators and council operators, and there are differences within the variation in increases, some because they're single site contracts or multiple site contracts, therefore the percentage increases are greater than ours. But this is based upon what we currently know, and that's been included within the budget for 23-24.
Councillor Criswell?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, obviously this is a political decision to change the pricing, and the prices are increasing at the worst possible time for the users. I think we will all accept that. So I just wondered what plan B is if we find 6 months down the line that there's been a huge exodus of users and we're not actually serving the people that we wish to serve. What's the plan? Because obviously there's a real risk there, and as part of the political decision, there must also be a political recovery decision about what happens if.
Okay, I'll take that question if I may. So through our extensive research, we've also worked closely with UK Active, the trade industry body. They've undertaken a study across multiple leisure providers and operators. And whilst it's still quite early to tell because some of those operators have only just implemented their price increases, there hasn't been a negative impact in terms of a mass reduction or mass removal of members. That's not to say it doesn't happen, and it's not to say that based upon what we know now in terms of the cost of living crisis that it doesn't happen. However, we're fairly comfortable, and one of the reasons why we've chosen to go with option B, which is the lesser of the amounts, is because we can remain competitive based upon the research that we've done within and across the local area within the competitors that we serve.
Thank you, Chairman. Simone was just coming back, so it may be she was going to answer it. But I mean, officers say they're happy with the position, but as I said, this is a political decision, so we need to be sure the portfolio holders happy with it, and they must have in the back of their mind what they're going to do if we find that the usage drops off. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got to be quite frank about this. Within our council, we would love to subsidise One Leisure and keep on doing it. But we know in our council, we've got 2.5 million gap. We need to make sure that our One Leisures are sustainable. We want to keep them. They are so recognised in our community. We would hate to lose them. They provide so much for our community in one place, as in, swimming, classes, you name it, football. to lose them just because we're not being sustainable would be an outcry for me. I'm very much behind keeping our one leisures and keeping them afloat. Plan B, we haven't got one. I am going to make sure this works. I want to make sure that one leisure is kept afloat. And if it means we have to increase those prices, then that's what we need to do. But to be quite honest, that is a good point. We'll take that away and we will look at that and decide if it doesn't work, then what will we do? But I am determined to make this work, hence the price increases, keep our one leisures floating. If we didn't have our one leisures, we would be without swimming pools within the district, public swimming pools. All we would have hotel swimming pools to provide. We have a substantial amount of swimming lessons. Our waiting list, I think, is about 400 at the moment across the district, waiting for swimming places. And I do believe that is the lack of swimming instructors. Correct. Yeah. So, I am so behind One Leisure and keeping them afloat.
Could I just add to that? On a weekly basis, myself and my management team review our admissions and our income and our expenditure. So we do keep a track of the admissions and how that's affected across the leisure centres. So I just wanted to reassure you that we don't just we just don't hope this doesn't work. We review it on a regular basis, and I'm in direct contact with Simone. And if we needed to put a mitigation strategy in, we would do.
Just come back if I may. So I'm pleased that the administration wants it to be sustainable, Chairman, and keep going. I think we all agree with that. I suppose the concern is there will be a section of society that will no longer use it as an expense of keeping it sustainable. So that's just the concern, Chairman.
Councillor Alban, and then back to Councillor Bywater.
I think the most concerning thing, and I admire Councillor Taylor's honesty, is the fact that the joint administration has no plan B on this. And we can be as proactive and as desirable to keep our leisure facilities open and active as we want. But unless there is a plan A and a plan B, particularly in the current economic climate, not just for income stream, but for usage and provision for our residents, particularly the most vulnerable, then we're really setting ourselves up as an authority to fail our residents. That really does concern me. On a broader point, can I go back to my first question, and it's related to this one, about how much officer involvement and how much member involvement took place in the drawing up of this report, please? It was never really answered.
There was a balanced approach to writing the report. As an officer, I undertook the background research and information, and I liaised very closely with Councillor Taylor in terms of the culmination and the drawing up of the report. And we're here today jointly to present the report.
Councillor Bywater.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to pick up from Councillor Simone Taylor regarding not losing swimming pools. I think it's a warning to us all with the current situation in Saltree. I find it quite ironic that we don't want to lose swimming pools in the district, yet we're losing Saltree swimming pool. So if that's not a warning to everybody about the current state of leisure facilities within the district, then I think we're burying our heads in the sand. I want to just go back to my point in relation to clarity on potential income versus actual income. I wanted to wait really to see if anybody else brought it up, but I can't see any figures here in relation to the spreadsheet and the columns and the information that's provided on what that actual income is and how it sits alongside the potential income that's being proposed. And I'll give you an example here that, we're talking about an 8.7% increase in the general cost. But actually, if you look at something like Leo's Fun, which is for 1 to 9 year olds in Huntingdon, that's 40% increase for children between the ages of 1 to 9 on the Leo's Fun zone. So it's not 8.7% to some people because they'll be paying 40% increase. So it is a concern in relation to this. I do have a major concern in relation to drop-off affordability for our residents. And I understand the current climate, and we should all be mindful of it, but not having a plan B is a massive concern to me.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater. Can I just remind you that Saltry Swimming Pool is not a One Leisure swimming pool. It was transferred by the previous administration, and unfortunately we are not in a financial position to take Saltry Swimming Pool on. Officers have offered their operational skills and will continue to offer their operational skills if Saltry Meridian Trust decide that they want to reopen it.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can empathise with a lot of the comments regarding the increase in the fees and affordability for residents. I do personally feel that Saltry's swimming pool example is a prime example of why this price increase needs to be implemented to ensure the ongoing running of our facilities. That'd be my own comment.
Any final questions? Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to seek clarification, please, on how much consideration was given to keeping the prices as they are and try and increase footfall and usage, particularly in the most vulnerable, the people that we might not be reaching as an authority, and also what consideration has been given to a pay-as-you-go offer for the use of for the gyms, alongside people that want to commit to a membership.
Okay, so I think there was a weighted argument about all three options, essentially. And whilst we underwent the new budgeting process for 23-24, we looked at how the outturn of that budget would look like before we finalised and presented the budget and our preferred option. In terms of footfall, we continually review opportunities to increase footfall across the organisation, across the centres. But I strongly believe we're still in a position of recovery in terms of COVID recovery, and we will be for some time. I think, like I say, the strategy that we've got in terms of marketing and communications focuses clearly on our programming and opportunities to increase footfall. But I think that the opportunity we've taken within the pricing element, particularly in options B and option C, is more targeted around the direct debits of health and fitness, more so than the actual casual pay and play revenue, because that is the highest element and attrition price point, which will drive our revenue forward. So there is more work to be done in terms of driving admissions, but the element of the price increase on options B and C is more centred around the direct debits of health and fitness.
Any final questions before we move on? No, I don't see any. So. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
So we now move on to item 5, warm spaces.
Sorry, are we not supposed to comment or vote on the recommendation rather than just note the report, Mr. Chairman?
The ONS panel doesn't have the power of voting, but obviously we've recorded the comments which will be added to the Cabinet report in order for the Cabinet to make the decisions on the recommendation.
Thanks for the clarification.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm very happy to present this report. I understand this is one that was requested by this committee, and I really appreciate this opportunity to have your feedback on the work done to date. And also, really, I think this is a cross-party issue, and I think it's something that hopefully we can continue to collaborate on in this meeting and beyond. So the climate and cost of living crisis motion that was put to full council in the last full council meeting, I'm really glad had sort of widespread support across the chamber and reflects, I think, this council's absolute determination to do all it can to support residents through the cost of living crisis. Obviously, we find ourselves in a situation where the council has its own pressures, largely driven by the same forces, and so our opportunities to respond are sadly limited. However, I do think that the programme of work that our officers and council members have put together in conjunction with the community is taking a really smart approach to finding ways to do things differently, and I hope that it's something that everyone here can support. But as I say, I really welcome your input. I'll hand over to our officers to give a presentation and look forward to having questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pitt. Could I just ask Liz Smith to introduce herself? A number of you won't know.
Oh, my life, technical skills required to the highest level. I'm so sorry for my ineptitude. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come along. So my name is Liz Smith. I've been working for Huntingdon District Council for about 18 months now, and I came in to deliver the COVID recovery programme and worked with Councillor Criswell at the time. We put together a fairly robust programme of activities that needs to reflect the needs of the local residents and act on it immediately has moved on a little bit. So my role has been sort of a more general programme manager, but still in that related area of being able to improve the outcomes for our residents. So that's why this sort of area of work is sort of I've been working with Oliver with this.
Lovely, thanks, Liz. So everyone's seen a copy of the report and an outline of the approach. And what we felt, and the theme that I certainly got through in terms of the development session, was this was more what you were more after, was a sort of broader conversation and an opportunity to contribute kind of cross-party to what we're trying to do in warm spaces. So in the light of that, what we've done is just pulled some slides together. So obviously we're happy to take any questions on anything in the report, but pulled some slides together to try and elicit that kind of more general conversation in terms of the kind of rationale and background to what we're doing with the Warm Spaces programme overall. So the first sort of key point I'd want to state is that the Warm Spaces programme very much seeks to kind of develop and build on the work that we've done historically in Huntingdonshire over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, and learning from those lessons that we took from the COVID response, where we worked absolutely seamlessly with community organisations, recognising that often local residents are the people who are best placed to solve their own problems, and our role is to try and support them in doing that. Sorry, looking at the wrong person. Great. So for those of you who have served more than one term on the council, you might remember the council's what we call transition community strategy. So we introduced a transition community strategy, recognising that we were going to do the place strategy work that we're doing now and didn't want to kind of prejudge the outcome. But this was one of the diagrams that kind of informed that. And one of the things that we found in communication with our residents, but also with community groups, is that in broad terms, what the resident want, the resident and the family at the heart of things, is they've got a range of needs. And around the outside, you've got all those, water, to be healthy, employment and work, income. They need to feel safe. They need to feel sort of listened to, and clearly they need food and so on. Now, what we saw during COVID was actually most people were able to sort of, fulfill those needs themselves, as many of us do on a day-to-day basis. But elsewhere, what we found were a range of organisations who were able to step in and support. Now, at a community level, that could be as small as an informal arrangement on the street, or it could be what we called our recognised organisations, a bigger community institutions such as Coresco in Sawtry, or Ramsey Neighbourhood Trust, or Huntingdonshire Community Network, who stepped in and kind of filled that space. There was a role for certain parishes throughout that process, and we've developed that as we've gone forward. And then a role that the district took, which was overwhelmingly around trying to convene that and pull those things together to make it easy for people who couldn't find those solutions to kind of move forward. And again, that is something that we've sort of tried to sort of roll forward and inform the way we've sort of developed the Warm Spaces programme. If you could click on, please. One of the other sort of considerations that went into the community strategy was the fact that some of the challenges that we've seen over the last number of years have begun to change. And this was a quick sort of summary of some of those things. So clearly the financial situation that local government is in is very different to the one it was when I started in local government in the early 2000s. You know, we are financially challenged. We are seeing year-on-year reductions in terms of some of our budgets, and that is the context in which we operate, even when at times we're seeing increased demand from our communities, as we're seeing with the Warm Spaces kind of challenges and the cost of living crisis at the moment. Now, the observations we made at the time was that an increasingly large proportion of our costs sit with the impacts of personal behaviour. So these are things where the active or passive choices of our residents often mean they develop needs or challenges that are very difficult to overcome. Now, the most obvious examples of some of those things will be one of the items on the agenda for the last scrutiny meeting, which is around kind of health and work. That clearly health issues such as obesity, diabetes, those kind of things are costs that the public sector is seeing, which to some extent have a large personal aspect to them. And clearly, issues such as the skill level of individual residents makes them to some extent more or less resilient to shocks in the economy. Now, these are bigger challenges, but how do we help people to make the choices in their own best interest? That first category. The second one, and a lot of work we've done historically, but during COVID in particular, has demonstrated that residents do not understand the distinctions between different organisations. And I'm sure you have all had those conversations on your doorsteps where they cannot understand the different roles and responsibility between town council, district council, county council, or you're the council, you do hospitals, don't you? You're the council, you run the police. And increasingly people just don't understand or recognise. And actually in that landscape, I think increasingly what we're trying to do is whoever you come to, trying to give people the support they need to get to where they want to get to. And again, if you think about that diagram of the resident in the middle, they don't care who helps them. They just need they want a route to those kind of pathways and solutions. So again, something's kind of informed the approach. Again, sort of slightly more depressingly, when you look at similar issues to the ones we've seen during COVID, and you look back for historical precedents, the closest you can really get to is the global financial crisis. And when you look to that kind of crash, what you saw was large-scale demand for 6 or 7 years afterwards. So some of those things in terms of unemployment, homelessness, some of those demand factors were still more than double the level they'd been prior to the financial crisis. So again, in preparing for all of this, what we kind of anticipated was the impacts of COVID were likely to have a long tail, but they've been exacerbated by some of the economic challenges that we've seen recently as well. And then finally, and you can see in little print at the bottom, the fact that sort of local government funding from central government has gone down nearly 60% in the 10 years from 2010. But increasingly, our income as a local authority is much more reliant on people's ability to pay their council tax and prosperous local businesses and their ability to pay business rates. So again, if you think about a virtuous circle, and starting at the first box again, it's in all our interest to support people into high-skilled opportunities that attract good employers, because those good, vibrant, employers that pay well enable people to pay their council tax, but also attract business rates in a vibrant area and all those other benefits that we'd want to see. So that's a whistle-stop tour on a document that's about 14 pages, but hopefully that makes sense in terms of some of that background and context. At which point I'll hand across to Liz to go through some of the specific detail in terms of kind of how we've translated that into the support for warm spaces. There is a slide on risk coming up, which I'm happy to step in on, Liz, if that's a bit dry. But other than that, over to you.
Oh, there we go. Green. Green means go. Go. Okay. Sorry. So the slides that Oliver's talked through really set the context of the sort of COVID, post-COVID environment. What we are acutely aware of, obviously, is that actually we want to take some of those positive aspects of what happened in COVID to be able to act now in the environment. I know there is some debate, discussion, and even with our portfolio holder about the name Warm Spaces, and not wanting it to be too stigmatised, but it seems to be a bit of a buzzword at the moment, or a bit of a strapline, and there is I think a need for us to be able to capitalise on that national movement as well. So if we call it something very, very different, then we'll spend a lot of time trying to explain to people what it actually is. So we sort of stuck with warm spaces, but using those elements of the community knows what the community needs. The community is willing to step up and support their local residents, and they can mobilise a significant workforce much quicker than us as a district council. We're sort of like the three elements that we really wanted to sort of take advantage of that were developed through COVID that we could apply to warm spaces. So as Oliver said, the sort of the context of that being that actually a lot of what we're trying to deliver in warm spaces already addresses now risks that we've already logged. Now you'll notice the sort of reference numbers beside those. That's because these are all risks that are logged within our organisational risk register, and they allude to basically the key elements of financial challenge that we're in, an increasing demand, and the effects of that demand on sort of health and sort of housing affordability that we all know. So this is not new news. This is what we're dealing with at the moment at this particular time. But these risks and the mitigations of that are part of what we've been working on consistently, and will also are working on within warm spaces. Thank you. So the report sort of gives you a fairly, I hope, a clear understanding about the genesis of where warm spaces came from, what it was that we're trying to achieve. There were three basic elements to the warm spaces. One was identifying the locations. Two was, what are people going to do in them? Are they just going to be warm and, sort of come together, or are they going to have meaningful activity? And then the third, which is more about that sort of that historic element of what are we trying to do and how can we move into a more preventative rather than a reactive model of being able to use this as an opportunity to be able to get eyes on is one phrase, but to see residents and to be able to really start to build a relationship with them, start to build some of that trust, start to understand what the wider interdependent challenges are that people are experiencing, and be able to go some way into preventing them from getting into crisis at an earlier point. A lot of our services have enormous waiting lists, not just ours, but our partners as well. If we look in health or a number of sort of support services for housing, it's because there is so much demand, and actually people are in crisis already. And so, being offered an appointment that is 2 months' time or 3 months' time because the thresholds are so high, because the demand is so high, is something that we want to try and actively work towards, being able to put interventions in place at an earlier stage, and warm spaces being in an environment where people are willingly coming, not because they are in a housing crisis and not because they are in a food crisis necessarily, but being able to help at an early stage is what warm spaces offers. So this slide addresses one of the key things, which I know is likely to come up in our discussion. No stigma approach. Now, it is a challenge to be able to make an offering to our district, our residents in our district, that doesn't label a person as being a vulnerable person, a person in need, a person who needs help. And one of the sort of reasons of using the community groups and the relationship they already have is to just build on that, and accepting that some of our warm spaces are of a faith denomination, and actually that might put some people off, but equally it might make others feel more comfortable to approach them in terms of their sort of everyday lives. Offering meaningful activities. Some places are just open. We've had Greg talk about the leisure centres. The cafes in the leisure centres were an easy win for us to be able to make those available and open, just as a space where people can come and gather and not be in the house basically. Other organisations have a whole programme of different activities, or just expanded on the activities that they've already done. And then being able to train our volunteers to be able to help with that prevention work, to be able to signpost, which is a very cliched phrase, and what we are actually trying to work towards is not just signposting, but actually active support for our residents to be able to help them through that navigate that very complicated pathway where you need to know who to ask and you need to know what form to fill in and you need to know all of those things. So being able to offer our volunteers that are in this in the warm spaces some support. So as a way of being able to do that, in this very room on Friday, we had a multi-agency workshop, which we had 27 people attending. I know, that was my, it seemed to be the hot ticket. People kept saying, oh yeah, you know, are you going to the summit? And I was thinking, oh, what's that? Oh yeah, that's our workshop. But we had really fantastic take up. So we had housing providers, we had DWP, we had a number of different health colleagues, we had a number of HDC services, we had a number of community groups. You know, that to me says everything about the desire, the genuine desire about everybody wanting to try and find a solution. And other than our identifying our locations and our activities, this was much more about being able to do that prevention work and how we can work collaboratively across agencies to be able to support. What is it that we need to be able to offer our volunteers in our warm spaces to be able to help them with that? Because, you know, with the greatest respect to volunteers, they're not skilled social workers. You know, they don't know everything that they need to know. Quite frankly, when the task, it's not on there, but one of the tasks was, you know, what is our current offer in the district? Where do we signpost to? Covered in post-its, as you can imagine. So many different localised and more district-wide offers. You know, we need to be able to surface that and be able to provide that to people that are in the warm spaces to be able to help our residents. So that's a journey. You can see on the left-hand picture at the bottom a bit of a sort of pathway that's been sort of proposed, which has been the work of long and lengthy discussions over a number of years across agencies about a way of being able to address an early and sort of an emerging emergency need, if you like, whether that's food, whether that's energy, whether that's a mental health issue, and to be able to prioritise that as the most important need, but then being able to follow that through in a bit of a structured way to be able to help volunteers understand and unpick some of those challenges. So it's not finished. It is very much a work in progress, but the feedback has been really, really positive. There's definitely a desire by all of those agencies to you know, find a solution that works. And then, you know, the likelihood is that's likely not to necessarily be completely a district-wide offer, because we don't want to try and boil the ocean, but for organisations that that are willing to work and trial this to then be able to get some real learning, you know, going back to our points about, you know, do we know, you know, we've got an idea about how this is work, but do we know what it is, and do we know with any confidence how it's going to work? The only way we're going to know is by sort of trialling it and testing it out and then taking feedback. So that's very much the desire from all of those agencies. So the next slide just gives you a view about what they did actually say. No spoilers in here at all. I think you can all identify and recognise with a number of those statements that were made by the partners that were there. 20 to 80% of appointments with GPs are not directly related to an actual health need. They're around the peripheral needs of the person, but they will come to a GP and you know, present needing support, but not necessarily a health one. Age UK were not quite at breaking point, but they were fairly desperate in saying that not only is the demand increased, but the amount of time taken with each resident is 3 times what it used to be because of the complexity. Citizens Advice Bureau are really struggling as well with an increasing demand, and as I've said, you know, sending on to other agencies is presenting them with a 2-month wait before anybody gets any direct support. DWP, interestingly, more jobs than they've ever had. So what is the difference between we have people in need and a route out of their current situation by employability, yet some people are not engaging with DWP to be able to access that route, being empowered and helping themselves. Housing Association saying that given that that is our poorest or cheapest rather housing offer that we have in the district, there are still people who are not engaging and are therefore being evicted out of the cheapest housing that we have available. You know, all of this demand and this pressure on residents is endemic across all of the partners and across all of our district. So, you know, we see warm spaces as a way of being able to start that conversation, start that relationship, and start to build in some of this preventative work. I think there was a request, it was maybe from Councillor Auburn, about which ones we've got. Now, I put 21 and counting. In the report, you will be aware that we do have a sort of a bit of a checks and balances before we'll publish some warm spaces, just to make sure they're safe. So obviously, public liability, fire risk assessment, you know, the usual stuff as a facility. So I will caveat this by saying these are the, if you like, formal warm spaces, and these are all being run by community third sector organisations, apart from the libraries and the leisure centres. But everything else listed on there are, you know, being run by committees or individuals, and then a merry band of volunteers. I don't wish that to sound condescending at all, but you know, the enthusiasm is there from the volunteer network. If I can have the next slide, you may have seen this as well. Now that is you can't actually read it. It is a list of warm spaces across our district with their activities, which is a considerably longer list than the 21 on the previous slide. But you know, we are not the warm spaces police. We are not going to stop any, you know, community group who wishes to offer something. They may not have registered and ticked our 6 boxes, but that does not mean that, you know, that is not a viable option for local people, run by local people. So, you know, all of this is fantastic. It is the local community responding to the local needs. So it's almost a bit of a 2-tier approach. We are not going to stop or, you know, control and manage the community offer that comes at a sort of an informal level, but there are some that we have that are registered on our website, and like I say, you know, that link which is on the HDC website Warm Spaces page gives an ever-growing list of those that are we have confidence that they are safe, if you like. Not saying that all of those aren't. I think we're pretty much sort of, I've given you the sort of the narrative. You've got the report, which is the sort of structure. So I'm certainly happy to take any questions that you have and really pose that question to you. Is there anything we're missing? Is there anything that you have concerns about? You know, what is it that we can do as an opportunity through delivering warm spaces to capitalise on some of those, you know, risks and demands that we have?
Thank you very much, Liz and Oliver, for those presentations. So just wanted, before we go to questions, just wanted to sort of throw in a few thoughts of my own. So I think when this first came up as a suggestion, it's very practical in terms of where are the public buildings that people can gather and be warm and hopefully meet other people. And that seemed like quite a straightforward thing that we would definitely support as a council. And I think from that, it's really grown. So partly that's recognising that volunteers probably, or the public, the communities are the best people to establish, to recognise where those venues might be and bring them to us rather than us going out and finding them. But they're also the best people to run them for various reasons. I think not least that it doesn't, you know, hopefully when we get to spring and people aren't struggling with their heating bills, but actually there will be an ongoing need for support. And so to build it around the volunteer base in the same way that the COVID response worked so brilliantly in this district, I think has a real lasting benefit. And then beyond that, actually, there's an opportunity when we're getting people together, then they're not, perhaps as Liz said, they're not presenting as in an emergency situation, but they've actually got some entrenched difficulties, whether financial or otherwise. Bringing those people into an environment where they've got social support, just, you know, community support, and chance to have those conversations. I think that's the legacy that I hope will come out of this immediate issue about keeping people warm through winter. So for me, this is a really exciting approach that, even though it's come about from a very difficult situation, I hope there's a legacy from this project that will be enduring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I can open that to the floor if there's any questions or comments. Councillor Shaw first, and I'll come to Councillor Criswell.
Yeah, what a fantastic initiative. I think it's absolutely brilliant. My only thought, looking at, I had a look at the map today, and you touched on the amount of locations currently at 21. Is that due? They all tend to be centred around towns and sort of bigger towns. Is that due to a lack of uptake from smaller villages, or is it just because it's in its infancy and it's not been set up yet?
Oh, there we go. I'm getting the hang of this slowly. It's a mixture of both. We at the very beginning of this process, we went out with a very sort of quick online form to get expressions of interest, and there were 3 areas who actually did come back, rural areas, who said, actually, you know, we just want to register that we don't actually think there's a need for a warm space, and you know, we have considered this, but we're sort of saying we want to record we're okay, thank you very much. So there's a bit of that. I think so. The initial sort of offer or expressions of interest went out via the parish and town councillors sort of distribution list. So all of the town councils and parishes through the Diocese of Ely, so all of the church groups, and through a number of registered our network of registered organisations. It may be, and my gut feel is that those town councils were, and for some of the, so what we've had in St Neots is somebody corralling everybody and saying, I'm going to give you a list of, you know, 7 or 8, and maybe they're just a bit better set up to start quite quickly because of the demand on volunteers and the availability of spaces, which is why we've ended up with, as you say, very sort of, not polarised, but they do seem centred more around the sort of the more built up areas. But certainly the smaller groups, some of them are, so one of the things that's in the report is that their warm spaces are available for up to £500 of the Community Chest Fund, and we're just starting to get some of those applications in. So some of those smaller areas, you know, more village based, will be needing that funding to be able to sustain their warm space, and we're just starting to get into a round of going through those. I think we're meeting next week, and I think there's about 4 applications now. We've had 1 so far, another 4. So actually I think they'll come on stream when there's funding available for them to sustain it over the winter. So, but it's a valid point, and actually that sort of gap analysis across the district is a key part of just making sure that there aren't any obvious gaps that we know about that might need a bit of strong arming in the nicest possible way, to just consider what the offers of help are to be able to help fill some of those.
I was just going to come in as well, and Liz, I'm going to put you on the spot slightly. Clearly, the fact that leisure centres and libraries predominantly are in the town centres skews that a little bit, and actually a number of our biggest and most established community groups, as Liz says, so Coresco, Ramsey Neighbourhood Trust and others are in sort of our bigger sort of towns as a part of it. My one observation, and correct me, Liz, is we perhaps haven't had the level of engagement from parish councils that we might have expected. So, you know, if you are going back and you think there is a need in your communities, I know how many of you serve on sort of parish councils and so on. If you do see a need, give them a bit of a shove, because as Liz says, there is support available to help them if in some more of those rural settings you see a gap. Is that fair, Liz?
Yes, I mean, some of the parish councils have worked with recognised organisations in their area, which is great. You know, it's a, you know, we'll do this bit, you do that bit. But there hasn't been, I'm going to say it, I'm just going to say it. The churches have actually been more forthcoming. We've had a significant number of churches come forward and offer, because more often than not, they actually have sort of coffee mornings and those sorts of provisions already established and set up. So what they're looking to do is just make that provision longer. So actually the buy-in and the uptake from the faith groups has actually been better than the parish councils. And maybe I shall stop there.
Just to jump in as well. So I've had quite a few really interesting conversations with Liz and Ollie about sort of the role of the community sector. So I come from a grassroots community background, I guess, and so I think those groups know intrinsically what their local communities need, and that's really powerful, and we need to, you know, capitalise on that. But at the same time, the district council has a district-wide view that both of those are valid. And I think that's the thing. How do we kind of bring both of those bits of intelligence together? And I think this process is really open to both of them. And so it might be that there's not one in a particular small village because there's not a need, or it might just be because there's no one there to respond to that need. And I think we have, as the map gets populated, we have an opportunity to go to those villages and say, have you thought about it? And I think the other thing just to add is that, I mean, a few conversations I've had, people have said, oh, what actually is a warm space? What's expected of us if we're going to say, yes, we'll do one? And the answer for me is we're not fixed about it at all. As long as the building's open, the heating's on, and it's a welcoming environment, then it ticks fundamentally the box that it can be one. And beyond that, it can be pretty much anything. And so I think I'd imagine, well, from the few conversations I've had, a few groups are thinking, well, we'd like to, but we're not really sure if we're set up for it. And I think we just want to get past that. We haven't been explicit about what we're asking for because we don't want to be, but that shouldn't mean that there's some sort of secret code that people have got to fit into. So really is open to groups of any kind to respond to that request. Thank you.
Councillor Criswell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members will see why I enjoyed working with Liz so much. Her enthusiasm shines through, and I'm sure it's helped develop this warm spaces scheme, Liz. So thank you very much. So yes, absolutely brilliant. And agree with what's been said about some that are springing up that aren't registered. The last thing we want to do is slay the goose that's laying the golden egg, because you know, if they're happy doing what they're doing and they're safe, then we don't need to interfere. So I quite agree with that. The ones that we are involved with, we're training up volunteers, obviously, because there's obvious merit in, well, we've got that captive audience, seeing how else we can help, and you've aptly described that. But I just wonder if you could paint me a picture of what we're teaching them or helping the volunteers to deliver. It's not just handing out leaflets. You know, are they able to refer? I mean, just, you know, if somebody is in need, they need to first break down any barriers and engage with them. But then what are they actually able to offer, or what we're hoping to enable them to offer in a physical sense, rather than, you know, us just talking about it? What would it actually feel like for somebody that needs help? Oh, sorry.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, and it's a really valid question. So that was basically the sort of the content of the workshop that was on Friday, which was, here's a model. Let's really interrogate it. Do we think as a model or a pathway or whatever, this is actually a usable tool that that we could start to train volunteers on? Now, before I talk a little bit about the model, Oliver and I also on the Thursday, it was a very busy day. We should have slept in here on the Thursday night because we were in here most of the time last week. But we had a training session delivered by a member of the Think Communities team, a lady called Sophie Terrell, for those of you that know her. And it was all about being able to change a conversation, and by using an acronym called Mindspace, but being able to actually use active language, empower people. So rather, her buzz phrase, and this is from a very motivational speaker called Cormac Russell, but rather than focusing on what's wrong, you focus on what's strong. And so it's very much a sort of it was a training session that allows you to think in a different way, and to be able to start to build a conversation with residents using just different language and sort of normalizing things. And the reason that Oliver and I went was for the application to being able to support volunteers in these warm spaces, or beyond that, to start putting some sort of foundation stones in to be able to give them a bit more confidence about, rather than descending on poor person who's just come in for a cup of tea, and because Doris down the road said she was going, so they came along as well, and then suddenly interrogated, what's wrong with you, why are you here, to be able to start to change that conversation. So that's sort of the first bit, being able to use different types of language to be sort of slightly less doing to, but more supporting with. Going then to the pathway that we talked about on Friday. what was really clear was actually the offers of what is available are many and multiple. And I think one of the next steps from that workshop is actually being able to distill that down into some quite salient tips. And one of the suggestions from people that were there was about actually being able to almost have a repository, a suite of maybe like little 2-minute, 1-minute bite-sized bits of information as well, which services could produce, rather than it being I'm going to signpost you to DWP, doom and gloom, being able to offer some sort of support around opportunities, if it's around skills and employability or debt management, income maximisation. That was a really big theme that came out of the multi-agency workshop, about how can we give people some of those tools and some of those support mechanisms without it having to be a statutory service. So I think the next step is, like I say, being able to distill down some of those offers that isn't just about here is a service who will help you, but being able to provide them with a library of resources. Now, I think the jury's out a little bit about hard copy literature. I know Ollie will say, doesn't work, it's a waste of money. Other agencies will say, actually, it's a way of being able to discreetly take information about something that may be pertinent to me, but I'm maybe not ready to have a conversation about it. I can give it to my son, my daughter. I can say, oh, I just picked this up at the library or wherever it is, and just percolate it for a bit. So I think it's looking at all of those different things, but under basically sort of 3 or 4 key headings, I would say. So about sort of debt and finance, around employability and skills, about sort of health, physical health and also mental health, being able to equip them with enough information that they can start to open some of those conversations. One of the other things that we've sent out recently to all of the warm spaces is a couple of links. So one is to it's called the Zero Suicide Alliance, I think, but it's a 20-minute, less than 20-minute bit of online. It's basically, it's a presentation, animation, just to be able to give a little bit of a background about suicide awareness, and it's okay to ask people if they have suicidal tendencies. That's not a bad thing to ask, because a lot of people think that is the case. So a little bit of background in that space. But there are some online training offers that we can support them with as well. But the pathway bit will be about understanding what sort of the key areas are, and being able to provide the volunteers with some of the support mechanisms that aren't just about signposting. I think we're all, both Oliver and Councillor Pitt, are really keen to make sure that the volunteers have an active role in that, rather than just basically passing the problem off to somebody else.
If I could just add a couple of things and just correct something that Liz said. So I don't. It's not that flies don't work. It's that they're my least preferable option. Yeah. So ideally we solve the problem there and then. There's always got to be number one in the kind of hierarchy. Number two is you take the details and I'll get someone to call you back to solve the problem. Number three is you give them the leaflet, but that's a pretty weak offer. And we know that often people who are in slightly difficult situations are overwhelmed anyway and don't take up the support that's available. So we'll always make sure that's there, but I think that's the sort of lowest possible option. And just a couple of things to add as well. We know that there's going to be some people who turn up and are in an immediate crisis. We know, we expect that to be the case, sadly. And in those moments, it might be that an energy token or a food package might address that. But I think one of the well-intentioned but unintended consequences of some of the COVID support is we've weaned people onto short-term immediate support rather than looking to ensure they have the longer-term sustainable solution. So actually, if they're struggling to heat their house today and you give them a 30 quid energy voucher, they're probably not going to be able to heat the house next week. But if they've got an underlying entitlement for benefit, which would increase the household income, getting that in place means next week and the next week and the next week is better. So it's working through those things. I think just in terms of that pathway, as Liz has described, we have done quite a lot of work with the mental health teams as well. And when you sit down with them and say, rather than fixating on people who have mental health, what's the causes of mental health and how could we prevent them? The key things that come out housing, income, and employment. The absence of those things makes your mental health worse. So that's the kind of first set of categories, and trying to get solutions in each of those areas. The second one is social connection. That if you've got no one to talk to and you're completely isolated, so back to Councillor Pitt's point, if they've struck up a really great relationship with Coresco as a warm space, wouldn't it be great if they're still going to that and still getting that support in the summer next year when it's bright and lovely because they like those people and they're people who support them? And then that final point is about physical activity, that we know that if you get there out in nature, you do your park runs, Councillor Auburn, or whatever it is, you feel a bit better about yourself and you're looking after your health. So again, what can we do? But really starting at the top with the income, employment and housing is probably the things that are going to be the best short-term kind of punts on that.
Thanks. I'll just jump in as well. So I think the other thing to mention, we're not expecting each warm space, as I mentioned earlier, to be the same. So we're not asking all of our librarians and leisure centre cafe operators to suddenly provide all this suite of, to do the training and provide all these services. But really it's about recognising which of these venues and have the people that can respond to these requirements. So I think that maybe there's 2 or 3 different types of response. So some of it will be triage and just knowing where to send people when they have a particular issue. And then some of it will be, quite in-depth support. But I think a lot of it, one thing that volunteers can and often do really well is to provide that kind of continuity of support. So they might not be the expert on anything at all. They might not be able to solve any problems, but they might be the same person that you'll see 3 months' time or 1 month or 2 weeks or whatever it might be, and say, did you get that thing sorted? Or how's that going? Or did you not hear back? Let me see if I can, give them a nudge. And I think that's something that volunteers will be really powerful at doing because they're not part of that system. And so just to open up those conversations, if that's all that happens, I think that would be a massive victory for this project.
So if we come to Councillor Alban and then Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really interested, and thank Becky for sorting out the list. I'm pleasantly surprised at some of the organisations that were up there, and reassured that the ones that I wasn't surprised about, the stepping into the gap. Coresco is the obvious one because they are so active in the community, not just in Councillor Bywater's ward. That's because that's where he lives and where they're based, but because of the surrounding villages between Stilton and Sawtry and their wider reach. It'd be useful to take you up on your offer I think you made to give us a map to see if we can help as councillors where the gaps are, particularly in the rural areas. Because it was interesting, Buckden, where I grew up, there were 2 within quite a short space of each other. So it's great that Buckden have got 2, but there might be, I didn't see any for Offord, there might well be there, just not on the list. So it's maybe we can encourage the ones that are set up to work with those that want, and again, provide that ground upwards support. To pick up on your phrase, and this has come up before at a meeting that Oliver and I had at Yaxley, I'm very conscious of the fact that the district council is sometimes seen as the doing to rather than the enabling people. And I think that's a good point you picked up on. So if we can enable one parish council or one village to help another, I think that'd be fantastic. And just on the funding, you mentioned about the funding there from the community pot. Does it follow that if it's the smaller areas that are asking for funding, the larger areas don't need it and they're self-sufficient, or are they entitled to apply for funding and just not doing so?
Thank you. So yes, very, very happy to provide a map and anything you can do in those areas. And I agree, being able to model what good looks like, I think would be a really useful tool for other warm spaces. Before I answer your question about the funding, I'm just going to relay a pertinent telephone call I had only this afternoon, just to sort of reinforce the difference and the variability of what warm spaces means. So it was a lady from a church in St Neots who was saying, well, we've got an activity in the morning on a Tuesday and we've got an activity on a Thursday afternoon, but we're not going to be open as such. It's just for those particular windows and quite specific activities. So, I'm worried that if we go out and we say we're a warm space, we're basically going to get people turning up at whatever time, expecting the church doors to be open. And my answer to that was, it is, as Councillor Pitt said, it's whatever you want it to be. Basically, if you're a library and you're open from, 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock or whatever, and you may or may not be having activities, but you just have an open space, that's one type of warm space. If you are literally only making a sort of you're using it as a promotion for the activities that you do, but you're being very inclusive and allowing anybody, rather than your faith group particularly, to access it, then that's just as good. Now, relating that into the funding, there is another stream of work which I won't bore you with massively, but we received about £250,000 from the ICS from health at the end of the financial year to be able to deliver projects or work to be able to improve health inequalities across our district. And our model, which was successful for dispersing that money, was that we would work with our network of recognised organisations, of which Coresco is one, and Brampton Hub and Ramsey Neighbourhood Trust, those organisations that during COVID were we had the checks and balances, and we knew that they were fairly robust and sustainable. So our model for that sort of £250,000 was actually to work with the communities and understand what their health needs were in their particular localities, and then be able to provide that funding so that they could enable different types of projects and provisions. Now, some of those organisations have chosen to set up warm spaces as their way of spending against some of that money. So their funding offer, if you like, is much more significant. And so that's maybe why we haven't got some of them listed, because they're actually going through a slightly longer process for a larger amount of money to then be able to stand up warm spaces, accepting that we are the 3rd of November. So, time is of the essence. No point standing up a warm space in June time. But they are slightly... My reassurance to you is that they're not ignoring this. They just have a slightly different route to being able to establish a warm space through a different funding stream, which is why they're absent at this point in time. In terms of the Community Chest Fund, the reason why we've capped it at £500, and Councillor Pitt is one of the panel members, is just because the pot is finite, and actually we would rather be able to support a wider number of warm spaces if that's what they need, than just focus on a few for a larger amount. So we sort of unilaterally said £500 is the cap if you're applying for warm spaces funding, and we're now, I think, sorry, spoiler alert, we're now going to be meeting every 2 weeks to get through the churn, because I think it was every 3 or 4 weeks that the panel was meeting. We can't have that situation for the need for funding. So those smaller funding opportunities will then get sort of recycled and get processed a lot quicker. It isn't sort of, tested against population number or anything like that. It's sort of a £500 is the limit, so that we can actually go for a greater number rather than anything else. But I mean, you will see from that. Are we able to go back to the list? Sorry. We do have collections of around localities. So you can see there's 4 there listed for St Neots. What have we got? 3 for Huntingdon, 4 for Huntingdon. Sorry, not very good eyesight. I think it's maybe a consequence of presenting now. I think, without wishing to sound too glib, but the weather's been quite nice. It was 19 degrees on Saturday evening where I live. It's only just turned quite chilly, and I think actually 21 now, when the weather's been pretty good, is demonstrates that there's a desire from the community sector to actually get some of this stuff up and running. But I don't doubt that probably the next 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, if you haven't stood up a warm space by the end of December, I don't think you're going to do it, are you? So I think it's basically going to be from now until the middle of December where we get that surge of responses coming through and the funding requests coming through. So maybe that list is just a little bit premature, but anything that you can do to be able to fill in some of those gaps where you know them, or just be able to just generally promote and assure people that it's not a prescriptive thing. To give you the juxtaposition, in East Cams and South Cams, they've commissioned Cams Acre to deliver warm spaces for them. They used their health money that we you chose to use in a different way, to be able to deliver warm spaces. They actually have a waiting list of organisations, which I think is a bit of a tragedy, really, because they're undertaking facilities checks and a huge raft of voluntary training, and they've only got capacity to process a certain number. So one, they've got a waiting list, and two, they're sat there worried that no one's going to turn up. And I'm thinking, if people don't turn up, the community will just respond to that by either just not offering it because there is no need, or they will do something proactive to be able to increase awareness of it. But actually, the community will respond to whether people come and attend or not. It's not the responsibility. The risk doesn't sit with us as a district council.
I think it's a really good point, Liz. And I think one of the other bits is the legacy will endure, won't it? So all that training we've put into those areas will have a life beyond the warm spaces period. So even if people don't turn up, people will know how to refer someone for benefits advice from us, or refer someone to DWP, or what support's available in those areas. And that will be as helpful next July, won't it, as it would be if someone turns up in December.
So coming next to Councillor Lowe and then Councillor Bywater.
Thank you. You've just answered my question. I was going to ask how you're going to encourage people to use the hubs. Well, sorry, that's my work. The warm spaces, because I work at South Cambs. We have community centres, and they're not used that often. It's going to be interesting to see where they are, but I know other villages in other counties have set up some warm spaces already, and they don't have anybody turning up. So I was just really wondering how you're going to try and get the I can't think of the word at the moment, but how are you going to get people aware of it and get across that, for them to get over the stigma of it's you're having to go because you can't afford to heat your house?
I would hope that people, we've done press releases as well, so I think so there's a general, sort of awareness within the media that, actually, given how difficult it is to get any reporter to pay any attention to anything that the district council does, you've already done a radio interview, we've had a couple of press interests. There's actually a real interest about, can we go along? Have you got any photos of these warm spaces? So I think nationally they're looking for those sort of early adopters, who's gone out and done something quickly, and they've actually been very proactive in contacting us and saying, can we speak to anyone on your list, and can we engage them? So I think that will help, and that goes back to the point about calling it warm space, because nationally or warm hubs, that's what it is. I think in terms of the localised promotion, I think individual communities will do that anyway. There is no need in my book that we have to infiltrate every localised Facebook group or any all of the myriad of newsletters and local even town newsletters and stuff, because I think intuitively the town councils are listed on there. They will do that for us. We can offer a district-wide perspective of putting things on the website and being able to do some of the media coverage in a district approach, but I think there will be a huge amount of localised attention to it, which I hope, but I can't guarantee, will address some of that, sort of stigma. If it is about the local group and it's a knitting group or something like that, I think that's the way that the stigma element of it then diminishes. I think it's harder with things like the libraries and the cafes in the leisure centres, because they are very much the only reason you would go there is because you can't afford to keep your heating on at home. But increasingly, if you go on the link on that website, so we have the warm spaces which has got the map on, and then there's a second page which actually lists the locations. Under each of those locations, it will give you the timetable of what they're offering, and more and more so, it's more about the activities offer. The sort of, don't just come and sit because you can't afford, it's come along and do some arts and crafts, or take some exercise or whatever it is. So I think the community groups, the churches, they are aware of the fact that just saying, come in and we'll help you is not going to attract many people at all. So there's definitely an offer being made about activities and making it engaging. But I think we watch and we learn, as much as we've invested some resource in this, but we want to mobilise the community to do this. We just have to keep that dialogue really live and learn from what they're saying to us. And we're not going to know that until, basically the weather gets colder and people start to use them.
So actually that picks up on what I was going to jump in on, which is basically that we don't have a logo. We're not caught, it's not a big banner where we're advertising this publicly. I think the term warm spaces will be just kind of used where it's appropriate. So it's on our website because we've got a project that we want people to sign up to. I think it's a really good idea to talk to the GPs to make sure that their social prescribing teams know that these are here and they know what they're there for. But actually, when it comes down to it, my local cafe that's open, like in the community centre foyer on a Tuesday morning only, I don't want them to start saying warm space on the door. It's actually just a cafe that's always been there, but it means that there's a referral pathway that the people who work in this sector, whether they be professionals or counsellors or whoever they might be, we're just aware that there's this network available. But I think your point about actually, if there's more ideas about who needs to know about this so they can kind of make sure that the people that we need to reach are finding their local warm space, that would be really helpful.
And Councillor, I'll jump in on the GP point. So we did have a range of practice managers and senior leaders from primary care in the meeting the other day. And I think there's two parts of it. So one is what we're trying to get them to do is adopt the same pathways as social prescribers that they would see within the warm space. So almost, your social prescriber can make sure that they could do the referral to us for council tax support, the referral to the DWP for universal credit, the referral to the education and welfare team for free school meals, or whatever it is. So we're building the capability in those teams, and that was really well received. And what they've said is, well, as social prescribers, we're not experts in all of these things, and actually having a model that works for us is really helpful. So we can absolutely reassure there. And Liz doesn't know this yet, but she's going to a meeting next week with the A1 primary care network, which covers Sawtree and other areas, to try and kind of embed this in there. But the other part of your question that I actually want to come back on specifically was, how do we get people there? Because there's been a bit of a pattern, again, throughout COVID, hasn't there, which is the kind of build it and they will come model often doesn't work, that you don't get the people you need turning up. And two conversations that we're very actively having at the moment, and we're not in a situation to be able to announce them, but is at the time that we're talking about needs of our residents and people who are vulnerable, Health are talking about a real fear about huge numbers of hospital admissions for people who are potentially undernourished and in cold property. So in any given year, sadly, nationally, about 17,500 people die just through the cold. If people are not able to put their heating on, that is likely to be more of an issue. One of the conversations we're having is about what can we do to get access to the lists of people that they're worried about, to proactively ring them, and to get them down to one of the warm spaces to have a look at them. Are we worried? But it's not a health thing. It's a community thing. Come on in, have a cup of tea, we'll have a look, and then we can go back to health and say, actually, we're really, really worried about this person. What could we put in place to try and address that kind of issue? So we're not seeing that. And then secondly, we're also looking at some tools that can cross-reference information that sits in benefit systems to spot underlying kind of entitlements. What they're called is people are eligible for something they're not getting. So pension credit is one of the most underclaimed benefits, for instance. And again, what that starts to give us is call lists where we can go out to people saying, oh, we've spotted that you might be eligible for this thing. And overwhelmingly, I know none of us want to wean people onto benefits, but if you're a pensioner, getting that additional money, it's not going to go on, fags and booze, is it? It's going to go on people putting a bit more money on the electric meter and helping everyone out. So there are a couple of areas to try and where we can reach out to people rather than hoping that they'll come forward to us.
I think it's brilliant what you're doing with the warm spaces. Well done.
There we go. I've got Councillor Bywater next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Listen, I just want to echo what's been said already. Really, this is building on the foundations of I recognise organisations and us coming and what we've learnt through COVID. So, good pat on the back to you all, really. Part of my question's already been answered in relation to that message about warm spaces. So please don't change the message. Let's stick to warm spaces. I guess us as local councils, and Cresco's been mentioned a lot. When we announce, or when you do your process through the warm spaces and the £500 allowance that they can get, I think it would be important to let local members know that, because we can push that message out and offer that sort of, arm around the shoulder, go in and have a cup of tea and have chat to some of the local community. I think that's our responsibility as members, and I'm sure everybody would agree that we're all keen to do that, and not just on this committee, the whole of the council. So I would encourage that. The only thing I wanted to just pick up really, which is quite unusual from the information, was about the DWP, and there's lots of jobs out there, and why aren't people taking these roles on? Is that because of transport? And warm hubs, and Councillor Shaw talked on some of our rural communities. I know some of my rural villages are looking at this and going through the process, but what impact is the bus having on this? Because that's the message that I keep hearing time and time again on a daily basis. The bus didn't turn up, and if we've got Mrs. Smith who's looking forward to a day at the warm space and the bus doesn't show up, what happens? So we've also got to be in touch with the reality of what's happening on the ground as well. I think that's important. But, massive well done. Let's keep going, but let's just keep real as well.
Liz, I'll take the first bite of this, and then you can correct everything I got wrong. So I think it's a really interesting example of the DWP one, isn't it? So DWP are really, really clear, never had more jobs. Now, one of the things, and Councillor Bywater, you might recall, we got some money from the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government to talk to people and understand why people do certain things and, don't do others. And what absolutely came clearly through is people find it easier to speak to community groups than they do with people with lanyards around their neck. And some of that is misconceptions. They fear that, their children might be taken away from them. They fear a whole host of things which aren't true, but people really worry about. And I think particularly with the DWP, there is a fear of things like, whether it's well-founded or not, things like sanctions and will things be taken off them and everything else, which at times, I think, feeds into the conversation and the work we've done with Sophie Terrell about the kind of conversations that are had. Rather than you must, is potentially what the community groups do quite well around, is turn that conversation around. Well, what do you want? I want to buy my kids some great presents for Christmas. Well, great, everyone wants to do that. As a parent, I want to do the same. Now, given that, are you aware that there's more jobs out there than there's ever been? And actually, there's a really brilliant offer from the DWP, and what they were outlining was things that, frankly, I didn't know, about the availability of things like laptops, loans for bikes, loans for petrol, they'll buy you a moped. There's a whole host of things. And I don't think probably the general population's aware of some of that. All of us seem surprised by that. And I think one of the things that we sort of took out in this conversation with DWP is if we can get that knowledge more broadly known out there in the community and through the warm spaces and that kind of thing, and they could have those introductory conversations, and did you know they could loan you for a laptop and this, that and the other, hopefully we might see some people who are more energised about those roles, and when we do go to DWP, feel it's a solution that they own and they're committed to, rather than something that's being pushed on them potentially. So that was my take. Liz, I'm sure you've got a far better considered one.
No, I mean, I was quite shocked when so it was the lady from over the road, Dawn, said that, but equally the diverse offer, and the other thing that she said, which was really telling, was that employers are so much more flexible as well in an environment where we've got so many jobs. They want to be able to employ people. So actually, from the supply side, it's never been so good to be able to accommodate flexible working, different hours, different shift patterns, whatever it takes to be able to fill those vacancies. A whole wealth of financial supports that can be offered. I think this led to the conversation, if people engage with us. If people don't engage with DWP, those offers can't be realised at all. And I think that was, that was some of the frustration coming from DWP, that we're trying to do everything we can to be able to support people along that pathway. We're not saying that we're going to put them straight into their dream job, but we are doing everything we can. but you know, there was this sort of sense that you can take a horse to water, and I think actually hearing that in a really multi-agency environment was quite shocking, but mobilised a lot of people to think, actually, you know, it's not like we're trying to do all of this, and the route to being able to help people be self-sufficient and empowered is actually, it falls at the last furlong because we just don't have the jobs. I think, you know, everybody in that session will think, actually, we can see the route to being able to help people in a sustainable and long-term way through employment and skills. The offer is now. We just need to be able to support people to help them along that pathway so that they can realise it.
So next is Councillor Shaw and then Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, HTC have got a warm spaces network, and various other councils have set up similar networks. Has there been any consideration of sort of joining forces? So, for example, if someone, I don't know, on the south coast has got a relative that they know struggling in Huntingdonshire, obviously you've got the map with all the warm spaces. Has there been any consideration to sort of join forces with other councils offering a similar service?
So, not necessarily national, although I think there is a national provision of warm spaces, but I think it might be faith-based. I'm not entirely sure. I think I've seen that, which may or may not encourage people. But certainly within the authority, so Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we had a meeting last week where we had the representative, admittedly they were sort of communications representatives to understand what the offers were in Peterborough. Certainly, you know, because of the commissioning to Cams Acre, and Cams Acre are a, you know, sort of county-wide, there's a bit of misinformation because what they're delivering is actually just in East Cams and South Cams. So a few organisations, like community groups, have been approached by them that were on our borders and gone, oh, well, brilliant, Cams Acre are doing it, I don't need to do it. So there was very much a need to sort of like, let's just be clear, who's doing what. We had Cambridge City, we had the chief exec from Cams Acre, that's covering East and South Cams, and Fenland on the call. But certainly there is a need, you know, our residents don't care, really, whether it's you know, across the border, as long as they know where it is. And again, I think that's part of what we can, going back to sort of Councillor Criswell's point at the very beginning, what are we training our volunteers? I think even that is something useful to be able to pass on to our volunteers. By the way, you know, you're wherever, Kimbolton or something like that, it's probably useful for you to know that actually there's warm spaces provision just over the district line, and this is what it looks like, and this is their website. So actually we can point people in different directions throughout the county. So very much we're trying to share as much information as we can, even if it's just sharing websites and saying, look on this one, which I know is not helpful to an individual resident, but certainly volunteers will be able to navigate around that. I think it'll be interesting to see whether there's a national picture. In my experience working in local authorities, they tend to take about 2 or 3 years to mobilise, and it is like trying to boil the ocean to get everybody to do the same thing. So I think we'll just start with what we can manage, and just share information around the authority.
Thank you. And then on to Councillor McAdam.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't really a question as such, it's more comment. I'm very encouraged by what I've heard. It strikes me that we're in a pretty unprecedented situation. And as Oliver said, none of us are experts at the moment, and it is a learning cycle. It's not just a learning cycle for us, but it's also a learning cycle for those who potentially will use the offer that's out there. A lot of success depends upon people's perceptions. And I think when you talk to people about the council, which is how they perceive it, not, you know, the different layers, there's a bit of a shield or a guard comes up. I think this is a great opportunity to break down those barriers. It seems to me that, well, I'm sure I'm right in saying that it's not just going to be this year. A miracle isn't going to happen in the next year. This is going to be going on for quite a few years to come. So it would appear to me that as it is a learning cycle, we will get better at this as the years go by, but also we should encourage as much feedback as possible from the users so that we can see, you know, how we can improve, because they're the people that know in the end, you know, if they feel let down or they feel it's wonderful, then we want to know about it and we can improve it next time around. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor McAdam. I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree. I think, and it comes back to that kind of meaningful conversation training, I think our sense is the most important contact is the first one. And if you speak to someone who seems to care and with whom cares about you and you establish some trust, the likelihood is you'll go back again. And we've talked a lot today about kind of pathways and solutions. There's no expectation on day one. It's like, I've got 27 questions and I'm going to run you through them. But if on first question you solve one thing, and someone you feel listened to, and then you come back the next week and potentially get on to the next thing, over time a relationship is established. So I think that's really valuable, and I think the feedback, not just from the user, but actually from the people, the volunteer, or the librarian or whoever it is, about, well, you've got all this stuff about benefits, but what you haven't got anything about is, I don't know, toy libraries or whatever it is, and actually you need something on that, we'll respond to that. The other thing that I think COVID did, which is, I think, being really significant for those who were involved, is you're right. I think my experience is the same, is that people instinctively don't always trust people who work for statutory agencies. Yep. But I think what changes is where someone speaks to someone in the community sector and they trust them, and that person says, I've got a friend, and they're a good person and they'll help you out. Would you mind having a conversation with Oliver? Suddenly a conversation goes on and you get some of that reflected trust, that you respect someone at Coresco says trust Ollie, they speak to me, and I think that might be something, again, that softens over time, that perception of what it means to be the council and that relationship. But time will tell, I think.
Councillor Walton.
Thank you very much. I think we all agree that we want this to be a successful initiative. Thanks. So inexperienced. Yeah, I think we can all agree that we want this to be a successful initiative, but it's not so much a question, I think, more sort of thoughts from a different perspective, from perhaps a council perspective, is that there is some admin involved in this from officers' point of view. They've got to do the administration for the applications, etc. I just wonder how much time that will take. Also within the document it says something about additional project management resource would be required. So is that going to take the form of recruitment? And if it does take recruitment, is that going to be permanent or temporary? What's the salary going to be? Will it come, it says it's here, it's going to come from reserve funding, excuse me. But when does that become normal funding? So if this is an ongoing initiative that goes on year, as maybe mentioned, which I suppose is it just winter demand, or does it have a finite date that says when it's warm it stops, or from there? Yeah, length of contract, or is it going to be resourced from within? I mean, it's not going to be put out to a job tender. And I suppose the other reflection is, after everything that's said, is does Warm Spaces just become another agency in the end, or does it just peter out? Might be me.
Okay. That's okay. Really good points, and thank you for raising those. So in answer to your first question about resource, at the moment, the greatest demand of resource is actually getting it set up. As with all of these things, the management of it is not as heavy and is not as demanding. So because there was a need and because we wanted to act quickly, I think Oliver started with trying to lead this, and then I had a pertinent conversation and said, you can't do that, you're a director, I'll do it. Is that okay? And you went, yes. So then I took it off him, and I, worked this up as best we could. I have an apprentice who works alongside me, and he does a fantastic job of basically doing all the administration. So that is resource that is within the establishment. The reason that there is a pertinent call out about resource is not for actually setting up warm spaces at this point in the initiative. It is more about the enduring legacy of what that potentially can mean. So I think the reason why it was couched in the report was because we recognise, and all of our discussion today has been about, this isn't just about opening up the library, keeping it warm, and then basically people coming in and going, you know, our model and our success criteria, let's be classic, if you like, are about getting some enduring legacies, whether that's through the community network that we're building and positive relationships between us as a district council and the community network, whether that's across partners, whether that's around, you know, just the enablement of a model that means that if another situation arises where we have to act quickly, we know and we're trusted and we know how to respond to that. There is a very likely, given some of the slides at the very beginning of this, which is increasing demand and decreasing revenue coming in and funding, that it might not be badged as warm spaces, but there will be other things that we need to address, we need to rise to. And I think the likelihood is that actually there will be an enduring amount of work that will need resource to manage it, to be able to address some of these much longer development pathways we've talked about. But, you know, if we do it with warm spaces, we will be able to touch a number of different organisations and we will be able to influence a number of our key partners. That is just the start of the journey. I truly believe that. And I think being able to resource it well so that it doesn't become, you know, like you say, it just stops at a sticking plaster for winter, to be able to get the real value and the benefits of being able to use this as a vehicle to start, will realistically need resource at a further date to be able to drive this, continue to drive this forward. You know, my background is project management. Projects will always fail because you don't resource them well enough. And actually it would be, you know, the biggest wasted opportunity if all we did was just put this into play now in a quick and dirty way and then lose all the benefits of it because we haven't resourced it well enough to be able to take it further into, you know, that model, that multi-agency working, collaborative working. So that's why, although it's in this as a warm spaces update, it wouldn't be transparent of me if I didn't include that as a reference to the legacy of what we want to achieve. Does that help at all?
And I think just to come back to the really specific questions, this would be fixed term appointments for anyone coming in to help support on this, you know, to set up those enduring legacies. It would not be kind of on an ongoing basis. Clearly, this is within a financial challenging environment. We're acutely aware we have less money. I think some of the things we expect to see is, does intervening sooner save cost elsewhere? So for instance, catching somebody at the point at which things are starting to go wrong, does that prevent demand on homelessness, for instance? Is there a business case there? And then the final thing I just want to add in is I spend HDC's money last. Now, one of the big things that's happened recently is the launch of integrated care systems. It's the latest reorganisation of health. They now have a duty around prevention. If I'm honest, we do prevention a damn sight better than health do. And I think in having models like this ready to go, I think there's every opportunity to get other people to pay for the outcomes that we all want because they need them too. So even if there is a need for resource, don't necessarily assume that we'll be putting our hand in our pocket first. That will only be as a last resort.
Are there any other questions or comments from the floor? No. Well, thank you to the entire team for the work you've been doing. It's absolutely brilliant, and I'm sure everyone else on the panel would join me in saying that. And thank you for your time this evening. On now to item 6, overview and scrutiny work plan.
So The overview and scrutiny work programme, just to give a quick update on the two projects ongoing at the moment. The review of external appointments to outside organisations working group is moving on well. There's been several meetings over the last couple of weeks gathering information, and that is almost at a stage where the draft report will now be formulated, and that will go through that panel early in the new year. And sort of obviously the outcomes of that will then be discussed at that point. On to the working group, which is attributed to this panel. It's a climate change group. There is a meeting next week of the members, which will focus on a new way forward for that, because obviously the historic legacy on that one is no longer necessarily relevant, given that things and the world have moved on since. So that group will then establish some terms of reference, and obviously we'll be able to report that back at the next meeting as to how the progress is going on that group. Obviously, recently there was a meeting of the overview and scrutiny panels to discuss the work programme development. Those themes have been pulled together and will be discussed at a meeting tomorrow of the chairs, the vice chairs, along with Joe Lancaster and Councillor Comboy. That will obviously then establish a bit of a programme for the coming remainder of the municipal year and the remainder of the sort of joint administration term, and that will obviously be communicated back as that's developed so that we can progress that and obviously express interest in any relevant groups that are coming up on that for you. Is there any other questions on that? No?
I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you for your time, everyone.